"A storm's coming," the dispatcher had said. But what no one knew was that a different kind of storm was already here. Right inside the courthouse, Titan, a massive German shepherd, burst through the doors. His paws clacked against the polished floor like thunder echoing in the walls. His coat was soaked from the downpour outside, formatted against his powerful frame. But his eyes were focused, unwavering, full of intent. In his jaws, held carefully but firmly, was the limp body of a 4-year-old girl, bruised beyond recognition. She was barely breathing, her tiny body battered by more than just a storm. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. No one knew what to do. No one could have expected this. The courthouse, usually a place for legal battles and official matters, had become the stage for an unimaginable act of heroism. And Titan, with no fanfare, simply stood there. He wasn't barking. He wasn't frantic. He was waiting. Waiting for someone, anyone, to understand the gravity of the situation. The room was frozen. The courthouse security scrambled, trying to make sense of the scene. Titan didn't budge. His eyes scanned the room, looking directly at anyone who dared meet his gaze. They could see the loyalty in those eyes, the silent plea for help. This dog wasn't here by accident. "Call 911, a voice shouted. But it was too late for that. The girl needed more than medical help. She needed the truth to come to light, and Titan was the only one who could bring it. The police arrived soon after, but their questions were met with silence. Who was this girl? Where had she come from? And more importantly, why had a retired police dog brought her here? The girl had no ID, no tags, and the security footage showed nothing. She wasn't missing. At least no one had reported her missing. Yet Titan, his fur drenched and his heart heavy, knew exactly what needed to be done. This was no ordinary rescue. This was something more. Titan lowered his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the girl. He was her protector, her guardian. But something in his demeanor said he wasn't just protecting her from physical harm. There was a deeper wound here, one that ran far beyond bruises and cuts. "Let's get her inside," the officer said, his voice strained with confusion. But even as they rushed the girl into the medical bay, Titan didn't follow. He stayed put, staring at the door as if waiting for the moment when the truth would unfold. When they would realize why this little girl had come to the courthouse in the first place. As the team worked to stabilize her, Detective Mark Callahan stood in the hallway watching Titan with a growing unease. He knew this dog. Titan wasn't just any canine. He had been one of the best. He had sniffed out bombs, apprehended criminals, and had been a true partner in the field. But this was different. Titan didn't make mistakes, especially not ones like this. If Titan had brought the girl here, it meant he knew something no one else did. Callahan took a deep breath. He couldn't ignore it any longer. "You're not just here to help her, are you?" he muttered to himself. Titan didn't respond, but he didn't need to. His eyes said everything. The doors to the medical room opened, and a nurse stepped out. "Detective, she's awake, barely, but she's asking for the dog." The request sent a chill down his spine. The girl, despite her injuries, wanted Titan. There was something between them, something more than just a pet and owner bond. Midsection call to subscribe. If you're captivated by Titan's loyalty and this powerful story of rescue, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of bravery and love. We bring you the most heartwarming, suspense-filled stories of animals who truly change lives. Click that subscribe button and don't miss the next chapter of Titan's journey. The girl was placed on a hospital bed, her fragile body covered in bruises, her eyes still wide with fear. She flinched when she saw Titan, but as soon as he stepped closer, her tense muscles relaxed. She reached out a small hand, brushing his fur with trembling fingers. She whispered his name, Titan. It was a name she had barely spoken before, but it seemed to be the one comfort she recognized. Titan lay down beside her, his large body acting as a shield. There was something almost sacred about the way he curled beside her. His body was a protective barrier between her and the world outside. Detective Callahan stood at the door, watching this silent exchange. It wasn't just a dog and a child. It was a bond forged in the flames of something deeper, a connection formed from shared experiences, secrets, pain, and a history that neither of them could yet speak. The nurse stepped up to Callahan, her voice low. "Detective, the girl. She's been through something terrible. Her injuries, this wasn't just a fall. She's been hurt. I don't know how long she's been in this condition, but it's been too long." Callahan's stomach twisted. He had seen his fair share of abuse cases, but this one felt different. The girl wasn't just the victim of a single act of violence. No, this was systematic, calculated. She had been held captive, hidden away, left to suffer. Who did this? Callahan asked, more to himself than anyone else. He looked at Titan, whose unwavering eyes told a story the dog couldn't put into words. Titan knew, but the truth was buried in layers of deceit. And every answer seemed to lead to more questions. This wasn't just about saving a child. This was about uncovering a dark secret, one that ran deeper than the bruises on her skin. The girl's voice, fragile but clear, broke the silence. "They told me not to tell." The words hung in the air, as heavy as the storm outside. The hospital room was quiet, save for the faint beep of monitors and the soft rustle of sheets. Titan sat at the edge of the bed, his head resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving the little girl. She slept, or perhaps she pretended to sleep, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. It was as if, even in rest, her body was tense, bracing for something, for someone. Detective Callahan watched from the doorway, arms crossed. He'd seen his share of trauma, seen the worst of human nature, but something about this was different. Titan wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline. And the girl, despite her battered state, was holding on to him like she was trying to hold on to something she didn't want to lose. She wasn't just clinging to life. She was clinging to him. The girl's name was still unknown, and every attempt to find her family had come up empty. Callahan had put out a request for missing persons, but no one had come forward. She didn't seem able to tell him anything. She had been mute since arriving at the hospital, but her eyes spoke volumes. Every time Titan was out of her sight, the fear in her eyes would surface. A tremor would run through her small frame, and she would start to call out softly, her voice shaking. "Titan, Titan." Her lips quivered, as if saying his name was all she could manage, as if in that name she found comfort. Callahan couldn't deny that the bond between them was undeniable. This wasn't just a dog protecting a child. It was something deeper. Titan had brought the girl here for a reason. The question was, what was that reason? The nurse entered quietly, checking the girl's vitals before glancing over at Callahan. She was a seasoned professional, but even she was shaken by the scene. "Detective," she said, her voice low, "she hasn't spoken a word since we brought her in, but I did manage to get her to eat a little bit. She's weak, but not unconscious. If she's holding something back, we might need to be patient with her." Callahan nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I'll be patient, but I need answers. This isn't just some random act of violence. Someone did this to her, someone she knows." Titan, sensing the growing tension, lifted his head and turned his gaze toward Callahan, locking eyes with him. It was as if to say, "I know what you're thinking, but it's not time yet." The dog's silent communication was unsettling. How could a dog understand so much about a situation that didn't make sense? Callahan knew Titan had been through countless dangerous situations, but this felt different. He stepped into the room and knelt beside the girl's bed, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Titan's eyes followed him, watchful but not aggressive. The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering, but she didn't wake. Her fingers twitched slightly, and Callahan noticed the faint tremble in her hand. Without thinking, he reached out, offering her the back of his hand. Her small fingers brushed against it, tentative at first. Then, almost as if drawn to him, she gripped it with surprising strength. Callahan could feel the chill of her skin, but there was something else in her grip, something that spoke of fear, of something darker lurking just beneath the surface. "Hey," Callahan whispered, keeping his voice soft, gentle. "You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a moment, it seemed like the words had no effect, but then her lips parted, and a raspy voice barely emerged. He's gone." Callahan leaned in closer, his heart pounding. "Who's gone, sweetheart? Who did this to you?" The girl's eyes darted toward Titan, and she nodded weakly, still clutching Callahan's hand, as if the touch was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak again. Instead, her gaze softened, and she whispered one word, a name: Titan. A chill ran through Callahan as he looked at the dog. Titan had been more than just a companion to this girl. He was part of something she wasn't ready to speak about. And somehow, in the silence that followed, Callahan knew that Titan had brought the girl here to keep her safe, not just from physical harm, but from something far more insidious. The hours passed in a blur. Callahan sat beside the girl, never straying too far, while Titan lay quietly on the floor beside her bed. His watchful eyes always scanned the room, guarding her in a way no one else could. The police had started their investigation, questioning everyone they could think of, but nothing was adding up. The girl's family had no known issues, no history of criminal activity. She had simply disappeared. The absence of any clues was maddening. No one in town had seen her. No one knew her name. It was as if she had fallen from the sky, landing here with Titan as her only protector. And then there was the girl's condition. The bruises on her body weren't the result of a single blow or accident. No, they were the result of months, maybe years of abuse. Her body bore the marks of someone who had been controlled, someone who had been kept in a cage of fear. But who would do such a thing to an innocent child? Callahan's phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up quickly, already dreading the news. "Detective, we've got something," came the voice on the other end. "What is it?" "We found something, an old report. A woman named Claire Hendricks. She was a social worker who went missing 2 years ago under strange circumstances. We think she might have been involved in a case about an adopted child, but we're still trying to connect the dots." Claire Hendricks. The name struck a chord with Callahan. He didn't know why, but something about it felt important. "Get me everything you can on her," he said, his voice firm. "And get me a list of every child she was working with." As the night stretched on, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The girl's name was still a mystery, but Callahan knew one thing for sure. Titan had brought her here for a reason. Whatever it was, whatever secret she was carrying, it was about to be uncovered. Call to action. If you're moved by Titan's story and the bravery of animals who step up in our darkest moments, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of loyalty, courage, and truth. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button now to stay connected. The days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next. The hospital room had become the girl's sanctuary, the one place where she wasn't alone. Titan stayed by her side, never leaving for more than a few moments at a time. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, and it was clear he was more than just a companion. Titan was a protector, and his every move seemed to speak of a bond that transcended words. Detective Callahan had spent countless hours going through every piece of evidence, every file, but nothing seemed to make sense. The girl's identity remained a mystery. Her connection to Claire Hendricks, a social worker who had gone missing 2 years ago, was a dead end. But one thing was undeniable. This wasn't just a random act of violence. Something much darker was at play. And the deeper Callahan dug, the more he realized the tangled web he was stepping into. The girl, whose name still hadn't been revealed, had begun to show small signs of progress. Her tremors had lessened, and she had started to engage with Titan more. She would reach out to touch his fur, her fingers brushing over his coat with a sense of reverence, as if drawing strength from him. But when Callahan tried to speak to her, she remained silent, her eyes clouded with a fear that wouldn't seem to dissipate. The nurse had called him over that morning, her face grim. "Detective, she's awake, and I think she wants to talk." Callahan's heart leapt in his chest. For days, he had been hoping for this moment. He walked into the room, Titan at his heels. The girl was sitting up in bed, her eyes alert, her fingers still resting on Titan's head. There was a calmness about her now, though a shadow still lingered in her gaze. "Hey there," Callahan said softly, his voice gentle, trying not to startle her. How are you feeling today?" The girl didn't answer, but her eyes flickered toward him, a moment of recognition. She knew he was the one trying to help. She didn't speak, but her grip on Titan tightened, and for the first time, there was a slight shift in her expression, something resembling trust. Callahan sat down in the chair across from her, keeping a careful distance, respecting her space. Titan lay down beside the bed, his large frame acting as a silent barrier, ever watchful. "I know you're scared," Callahan said, his voice steady but filled with empathy. "But you don't have to be afraid anymore. Titan's here. I'm here. We're not going to let anything happen to you." The girl's lips trembled, but no words came. Her eyes seemed to dart toward the door, as if she feared someone might come in. She squeezed Titan's fur again, and Callahan noticed the way her eyes fluttered, a tear escaping from the corner of her eye. "Whatever happened to you, whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone," Callahan continued, trying to coax her into speaking. "But I need to know who did this to you. I need to help you." There was a long pause. The girl's shoulders tensed, as if she were struggling with some internal battle. Then, finally, she spoke, barely above a whisper. "They told me not to tell." Her voice cracked, and it was as if the weight of those words had pushed her to the edge. It was clear she had been hiding something, something that made her terrified to speak. Callahan leaned in slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "Who told you not to tell? Who are you so scared of?" The girl's eyes darted around the room again, her fear mounting. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words were swallowed by her hesitation. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "They are watching." The room went still. Callahan's heart skipped a beat. He had expected trauma, had expected fear, but this was something else. "They are watching." Those words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Someone or something was pulling the strings behind the scenes, controlling the girl's every move, keeping her silent, keeping her in fear. But who? Callahan's mind raced. It didn't take long to piece things together. The girl had been through hell, and it wasn't just a simple case of neglect. There was a system, a structure, a power behind it all, and Titan was somehow part of it. Before he could ask another question, the girl clutched Titan's collar tighter, her eyes widening in panic. "They'll come. They'll come for me," she whispered urgently. Callahan stood, feeling the weight of her words press down on him. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was organized. This was deliberate. And Titan had known it. He had known it all along. "I promise you, I'll keep you safe," Callahan said, his voice resolute. "No one's going to hurt you again, but I need you to trust me." The girl's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in them. But it was fleeting, like a candle struggling against the wind. "I'll protect you," Callahan said, his voice softer now, trying to reassure her. "But I need to know what happened. Who did this to you?" The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering to Titan, who was watching her with an intensity that made Callahan uneasy. There was something more here, something Titan knew, that neither he nor the girl were ready to share just yet. With a deep breath, the girl spoke again, her voice trembling but determined. "It was my family, but they weren't my family. They took me. They kept me." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Callahan's blood ran cold. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. "Your family," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The girl nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "They didn't want me. They used me." Titan's ears perked up at the mention of family. Callahan glanced at him, but the dog remained motionless, his eyes never leaving the girl, as if waiting for her to tell the rest of the story. "What do you mean?" Callahan asked gently. "What did they do to you?" The girl's lip quivered as she closed her eyes. "They kept me locked up. They made me do things. They made me pretend to be someone else." Callahan's heart pounded in his chest. This was worse than he had feared. This was not just a case of neglect. This was something far more sinister: manipulation, isolation, abuse. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. But it was clear now. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. "I'm not who they said I was." I'm not her. Not who? Callahan asked, leaning forward. Who are you? The girl took a deep breath, the words coming out in a rush. I'm not their daughter. I'm Claire's. As the truth started to unfurl, Callahan knew the road ahead was dark, filled with secrets and lies. But one thing was certain. The girl had survived, and Titan had been the key to her survival. In the end, the bond between them was more than just chance. Titan hadn't just saved her life. He had given her a voice. And now, with her courage growing, the truth was finally coming to light. The air in the hospital room had shifted. No longer was it just a place of recovery. It had become a battleground, a quiet war between the past and the present, between the truth and the lies that had kept the girl trapped for so long. As the days went by, the girl had become more open, more willing to trust. Titan had been her anchor, a steadfast companion that kept her grounded in a world that had betrayed her. Detective Callahan spent every waking hour trying to piece together the story, following the trail of breadcrumbs that the girl had left behind. Her name, Claire, not the one her family had given her, had given him a new lead. It had been 2 years since Claire Hendricks, the social worker, had gone missing. But it wasn't just the case of a missing woman anymore. Now it was a thread that could unravel a much larger conspiracy, a hidden world of trafficking and exploitation that Callahan had barely begun to understand. Titan remained at this girl's side, unwavering, as if he understood that the storm hadn't passed yet. He was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes, something that spoke of a past still very much alive and a future yet to be decided. The girl, now identified as Claire's daughter, was still hesitant to speak openly about her past. The trauma she had endured was too deep, the scars too fresh. But she had started to open up, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each passing day. Callahan had visited her every day, bringing a quiet presence, hoping that with time she would trust him enough to speak the full truth. He couldn't help but feel a deep responsibility for her, a pull to protect her at all costs. Her story wasn't just about the abuse she'd suffered. It was about a system that had failed her, a system that had been complicit in her silence. The morning after the girl's confession, Callahan sat in his car, staring at the paperwork in front of him. It was the last thing he wanted to look at, but it was the only thing that could lead him to the truth. The connection between Claire Hendricks and the girl, her biological daughter, was clearer than ever now. But there was still so much left to uncover. Claire's disappearance, her involvement with a network of human trafficking, and the strange case of the girl's sudden appearance at the courthouse. It was all starting to make sense, but the full picture was still blurred. Callahan's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He picked it up, expecting more bad news, but it was the call he had been waiting for. "Detective, we got something on Hendricks," the voice on the other end said. "You need to get down here. We're at the old warehouse on 7th. The address rang a bell, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. It had been a hot spot for rumors for years, a place that no one dared venture near. But now it was the key to unlocking everything. By the time Callahan arrived at the warehouse, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. He was met by a team of officers, all scanning the perimeter of the dilapidated building. "What do we have?" Callahan asked, his voice low. "The place is a maze," an officer said, nodding toward the entrance. "But we found something inside, something that connects Hendricks to a larger network. We think we found the operation." Callahan followed the officer inside, his boots crunching on the gravel floor. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the air thick with dust. But as they ventured deeper into the building, the true scope of what they had uncovered began to take shape. In the back corner of the warehouse, under a pile of tarps, they found a set of files. Callahan's heart raced as he flipped through them. It wasn't just documentation of trafficking. It was a list of names, children who had been taken, hidden, and used for purposes that made Callahan's blood run cold. But one name kept popping up like a cruel twist of fate: Claire Hendricks. "Looks like she was deeper in this than we thought," Callahan muttered to himself. He looked through the papers more carefully, seeing names he recognized, families, friends, people who had been overlooked or ignored. Suddenly, it hit him. The girl, the one Titan had saved, wasn't just a victim of neglect. She had been stolen, kept hidden, part of a sick system that used children as pawns in a game no one had asked to play. Later that evening, Callahan returned to the hospital, his mind spinning with the new revelations. He needed to talk to the girl. He needed to make sure she was okay, to ensure she understood what was happening. When he entered her room, he found her sitting on the bed, her legs tucked underneath her. Titan lay at her feet, his eyes following Callahan as he approached. The girl's eyes were still haunted, but there was a sense of clarity about her now, a realization that she wasn't just a victim in a cruel story. She was a survivor. She had a voice. And now Callahan was here to help her use it. "Hey," Callahan said softly, sitting down beside her. "I have some news." The girl glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "What news?" Callahan hesitated. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. "I've been investigating the people who did this to you. I found some of the people who were involved. They're going down. No one is going to hurt you anymore." Her lips trembled, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she looked down at Titan, her fingers reaching out to stroke his fur. "What about Titan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Callahan smiled gently. "He's always going to be here for you, just like me. We won't let anyone take you away." The girl nodded, her grip tightening on Titan's fur. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. It was her way of telling Callahan she was ready to face the truth, that she was ready to take back her life. The next few days passed quickly as the investigation into the trafficking ring ramped up. Callahan had his hands full, but with every passing hour, the pieces started to fall into place. The girl, Claire's biological daughter, was safe. The people who had hurt her, who had stolen her from the world, would pay for their actions. But for now, all that mattered was that the girl had a future, and Titan, the dog who had saved her, would be there every step of the way. As Callahan left the hospital that night, his mind was still racing. The darkness that had clouded this case was starting to clear. But there was one thing that kept him grounded: the unwavering loyalty of a dog and the courage of a little girl who had finally found her voice. The days that followed felt like a race against time. The investigation had reached a critical point. Callahan could feel the weight of it. Each new piece of evidence revealed a deeper and more insidious conspiracy than anyone could have imagined. The trafficking ring that had once seemed like a shadowy rumor was now a very real, very dangerous network with far-reaching implications. But there was still one thing that remained constant: Titan. The dog had become more than just a companion for the girl. He was the symbol of the strength she needed to face the truth. Detective Callahan stood in the small office of the courthouse, staring at the stacks of evidence piled on the table before him. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue. This wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice. It was about saving a child's future, about making sure no one else would ever fall victim to the same horrors she had endured. Titan was resting in the corner as always, his alert eyes scanning the room, always aware. It was as if he knew that the storm wasn't over. He had been with the girl every step of the way, offering silent support, never faltering. But Callahan knew they were about to face something bigger than they had ever imagined. "Detective," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Officer Harris, a young cop who had been assisting with the investigation, stepped into the room, his face tense. "We've got a lead. One of the suspects just made a move. We think they're planning to cover their tracks. We need to act now." Callahan's heart rate quickened. The time had come. The warehouse on 7th Street had once been a place where nothing but whispers filled the air. Whispers about shady deals, hidden truths, and the kind of operations that thrived in the dark corners of the city. But now it was ground zero for everything that had been uncovered. It was where Claire Hendricks had disappeared, where the trafficking ring had set up shop, and where the final confrontation would take place. As Callahan and his team arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Titan, as always, was by his side, his senses on high alert. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and ominous, like a fortress built on lies. Callahan's instincts were sharp, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much bigger than they realized. "Stay close," Callahan instructed his team. They moved with purpose, each officer prepared for whatever might happen. Titan, walking beside Callahan, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He was calm, but there was an energy to him that suggested he was ready for anything. They entered the warehouse cautiously, moving in formation. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound being the shuffle of feet on the dusty floor. Callahan's eyes darted around, scanning every corner, every shadow. His mind raced. What if they were too late? What if the people behind this had already covered their tracks? Titan stopped suddenly, his ears perked up, his body stiffening. Callahan's eyes narrowed. He had learned to trust the dog's instincts. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. Titan slowly moved forward, his body tense, but his steps deliberate. He stopped in front of a steel door at the back of the warehouse. There was something behind it, a presence. Callahan nodded to his team, signaling them to surround the door. "Ready," Callahan whispered. The officers nodded, and in one swift movement, they breached the door. Inside, the room was dark, lit only by a few dim, flickering lights. There were boxes stacked high, piles of paperwork scattered on the floor, and at the center of it all, a man in a chair, tied up and gagged. His eyes were wide with fear. But as soon as Callahan stepped into the room, the man's expression changed. He knew who Callahan was. Callahan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're going to tell me everything now." The man's eyes darted toward Titan, who stood unwavering beside Callahan. The dog was like a silent sentinel, watching, waiting. The man trembled, his breath shallow. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," the man stammered. "They made me do it." "They? Who?" Callahan demanded. "Who are you talking about?" The man's eyes flickered to the corner of the room where a shadow moved. Callahan felt a chill run down his spine. There was someone else here, someone watching. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the back of the room. Callahan's instincts kicked in, and he spun around, drawing his gun. Titan growled low, his hackles raised as a tall figure stepped into the light. It was the last person Callahan had expected to see. "Claire," he whispered, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. There she was, Claire Hendricks, standing in front of them, her eyes cold, calculating. She had been the missing link, the one piece of the puzzle Callahan had been unable to place. But now, as she stood there, everything clicked into place. She wasn't just a social worker. She wasn't just a victim. She had been the mastermind. "You been running this?" Callahan asked, his voice filled with disgust. Claire's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think this is just about one little girl? This is bigger than you know, detective. This is about power, control, money." She glanced at the man tied up on the floor, and he cringed, his eyes wide with terror. "You should have stayed out of it, Callahan. Now look where you are. You're too late." Callahan's heart pounded. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. Claire's smile faltered for just a moment before she regained her composure. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device, something that looked like a detonator. Callahan's eyes widened in realization. "You think I'm going to let you walk out of here with her?" Claire said, her voice dangerously calm. "You'll never leave. None of you will." The standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Claire's finger hovered over the button, her eyes darting between Callahan, Titan, and the officers behind him. There was no telling how far she was willing to go to protect the network she had built. But Callahan wasn't going to let that happen. "Titan," Callahan said, his voice calm but firm. The dog's ears perked up, and in one swift movement, Titan leapt forward, knocking the device from Claire's hand. In a flash, Callahan was on her, pinning her to the ground, his gun aimed directly at her. "Game over," he said, his voice resolute. The warehouse was filled with silence, broken only by the sound of Claire's harsh breathing. The tension in the air was palpable. But it was over. Claire was arrested. The human trafficking operation dismantled. And the girl, finally identified as Claire's biological daughter, was free. As Callahan walked out of the warehouse, Titan by his side, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. The girl, the one who had been through so much, was safe, and Titan, the silent hero who had led them here, had done what he was born to do. The courtroom was filled with silence, save for the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from the back of the room. Detective Callahan stood at the front, his eyes scanning the room, his mind racing. The trial had begun, and this was the moment that everything had been leading up to, the culmination of months of investigation, sleepless nights, and the sacrifice of a little girl who had finally found her voice. Titan sat by his side, as he always did. The dog's presence was a comforting reminder of everything they had been through, a symbol of loyalty and resilience. As Callahan glanced down at the German Shepherd, he couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude. Titan wasn't just a dog. He was family. He had saved the girl, and in doing so, he had helped save the truth. Together, they had faced the darkness and brought it into the light. The defendant sat across from Callahan, her eyes cold, her expression unreadable. Claire Hendricks, the woman who had once been a social worker, now stood as the mastermind behind a web of human trafficking that had destroyed countless lives. Her face was pale, but there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet confidence that Callahan couldn't quite shake. She had been caught, but there was something about her that made him uneasy, as if she were just the tip of the iceberg, and there was still so much more beneath the surface. Claire's daughter, the little girl Titan had saved, sat in the witness stand, her eyes downcast. She had grown stronger over the past few weeks, but the trauma she had endured was still raw. She had yet to speak of the full extent of what had happened, and Callahan knew that in time she would find the words. But for now, she was safe. She was with people who cared for her, and that was all that mattered. The trial went on for hours, and Callahan found himself revisiting the dark memories of the case, the quiet moments spent in the hospital room with the girl, the chilling revelations about Claire, and the final confrontation in the warehouse. Each piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. But it wasn't enough. Claire's involvement in the trafficking ring was just one part of a much larger picture. There were still more people involved, more families destroyed, and more lives at stake. And Callahan couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. Claire's defense team did everything they could to shift the blame, to point fingers at anyone but their client. But the evidence was overwhelming. The documents found in the warehouse, the testimonies of victims who had been saved, and the girl's bravery in coming forward had all but sealed Claire's fate. There was no escaping the truth anymore. As the trial came to a close, the judge stood, his gavel raised. The room held its breath as he delivered the verdict. "Guilty," he said simply. The word echoed in the silence, and for a moment it seemed as though time stood still. Claire Hendricks, the woman who had trafficked children, who had stolen innocence from so many, was finally going to pay for her crimes. But even as the sentence was handed down, Callahan couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly over. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many dark corners left unexplored. The courtroom emptied slowly, the tension lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. Callahan stood at the back of the room, watching as the officers escorted Claire from the stand. She didn't look at him. She didn't acknowledge him, but Callahan knew that she understood. She knew she had lost the game she had been playing for so long. Titan, as always, stayed by Callahan's side. The dog's eyes were calm, but there was something in them, a quiet understanding, as if he knew that their job wasn't done yet. Titan had been the one to save the girl, and now it was up to the system to do the rest. But Callahan knew that justice didn't always come easy. It wasn't always clear-cut. And the truth, as hard as it was to face, was often buried beneath layers of lies. "Thank you," the girl said, her voice soft but strong as she approached Callahan. Titan stood at her side, his tail wagging gently. The girl reached out and patted Titan's head, her fingers brushing through his fur. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. "You don't have to thank me," Callahan said, his voice low. "You did the hard part. You're the one who found your voice, who brought the truth to light." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without Titan," she said. her voice steady now. "He was the only one who didn't give up on me." Callahan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Titan doesn't give up on anyone. Later that evening, Callahan stood outside the courthouse, looking up at the stars. The case was over. Claire was behind bars. But something in Callahan's chest told him that this was just the first chapter in a much larger story. The girl was safe for now, but there were more victims out there, more children waiting to be found. And he couldn't stop until every last one of them was safe. Titan sat beside him, his body relaxed but alert, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of danger. But there was no danger tonight. Tonight, they had won. Tonight, the world was a little bit safer. "Good boy," Callahan muttered, his voice thick with emotion. Titan looked up at him, his tail giving a small, satisfied wag. The bond between them was unspoken, yet stronger than anything Callahan had ever known. It was a bond forged in the fires of war, of loss, and of survival, and it would carry them forward into whatever came next. Thank you for following the story of Titan and the girl. We've come to the end of their journey, but the truth is, their story isn't finished. There are always more lives to save, more battles to fight. What do you think? Will Titan and Callahan continue their fight for justice? Who are the next heroes that will rise from the ashes of this broken world? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more incredible, inspiring stories of loyalty, bravery, and survival. You don't want to miss what's next.